Ashley, can we go to the next slide? Okay. So I wanted to kind of start out with a little bit about what drew me to the research on single moms. So I started in Walden way back in 2012, and I was at my first residency. And what attracted me to Walden actually was just such a large female population of students. And when I was at my residency and I was looking around at all the women around me, I saw these like a lot of moms, and I was talking to them, and they were actually, there was a mothers and daughters like studying together, doing doctoral work. It was so cool. And a lot of them were single moms. And I was at the time, married. I had two little kids and I was struggling. I thought, oh my God, how are you doing this? So I actually went back home, or actually to my hotel room at the start, and I started researching a little bit about single moms in higher ed. And I found out that there wasn't a lot of research out there on single moms in higher ed. Actually, hardly anything. It was mostly women in general in higher ed, and single moms, but in the associate degree programs, and also kind of about like welfare and welfare reform and how they're faring with welfare reform. And I thought, there was a lot of just kind of negativity in the research, and I wanted to kind of do something positive. And so I thought, well, you know what? I want to look at their successes. So that's kind of what started me with this research. So with that, that leads me to the purpose of the study. And basically, I just explored the lived experience of single moms and working on their online graduate degrees, and looking specifically at factors for their academic motivation, their self-efficacy, and their social support, and how these factors facilitate their success. And of course, I also identified barriers, because every mom, single mom, even if you're single or not a mom, you have barriers. But I wanted to look at their barriers, and I wanted to look at how they cope and overcome those barriers. Next slide, please. So the framework was, I'm sorry, let me start. I'll start with the design. So it was a phenomenological study. I used open-ended in-depth interviews to get the data. I also used Mustaka's transcendental phenomenological model for data analysis. And the frameworks that I used as a lens for the study was Paul Pentrick's motivational self-regulated learning model for achievement, and Angela Duckworth's model on the psychology of achievement called GRIT. Pentrick focused more on the cognitive piece of motivation, but I also wanted to look at the psychology of personality, and that's why I pulled the Duckworth model in on GRIT. Next slide, please. And so these were the research questions that guided the study. The first one, I looked at the lived experiences, which is the whole phenomenological overview of the experience of these women as one. I also then, for research question 2, this focuses on the motivation and the efficacy and the social support. Research question 3 focuses on the barriers, and research question 4 focused on the coping methods. So next slide. Now, the participants, I used what's called a purposeful selection, and that was based on the setting of the study, which was online graduate programs. So I was a Walden student at the time, so I focused on Walden as my setting. The participants were recruited through the Walden participant pool. I also had to reach out to social media groups specifically for online grad students, because there was some time when my data collection lagged a bit. So I thought, let me just extend it a bit. I ended up with a final sample size of 10, and that's when data saturation was met, and which is it's the norm for qualitative research, especially phenomenology. And the participant criteria was graduate student single moms. They had to be head of household, living alone with their dependent children under the age of 18, and currently enrolled in an online graduate program for 1 year. Next slide. So this slide describes the findings, starting with the themes. These are the first 4 themes that had come out, that emerged from the data. So for theme 1 came from the mom's desire to do better. I mean, this was weaved throughout the interviews, the importance of just being a mom, and just they wanted to be better for their children and be more complete as a mother. Within that theme was a sub-theme that they just were looking for financial stability and security. A lot of the moms grew up in poverty, so much to the point where some of them, they had said that they didn't even know when they were, that when their next meal was coming from. They struggled a lot, and they just didn't want that type of life for their children. Others wanted financial wellness. They wanted to be able to support themselves and their children, and they really didn't want to have to rely on family members or government aid. So that was some motive. that was the motivating factor there. The sub-theme under theme one was serving as a positive role model for their children. They said that role modeling was nice because they were inadvertently bonding with their kids as well. And when they were bonding because they were sharing their achievements. So a lot of them would do their work with their kids doing their homework. And it was kind of nice because they had said that kind of gave them a sense of camaraderie, like we're all in this together type of thing. The second theme, aspects of self-character, this came out of the moms describing the specific attributes of themselves that led to their achievement. And within that theme, the sub-theme of being an achiever, this came through with their self-awareness of their abilities to accomplish their degrees. And this was based on what they've done in the past. So these women were mostly 4.0 students. I mean, they had a lot of effort, and they did a lot of scholarly achievement. So they kind of knew they could do it. And they also acknowledged their mothering abilities and their professional achievements. So that was part of that. They also described a couple terms that's a little bit like the grit. It's self-resilience. They talked about their self-determination, their efficacy, and their pride. They were very proud for what they've been able to accomplish based on their situations. And because of this pride, a lot of them said, you know, quitting was not an option. Like they had to just keep going forward no matter what. And so, I'm sorry, I lost my place there. Oh, so also then under that theme too is the using one's personal power. This was based out of the comments that the mothers talked about, the part of the personality that drove that power within themselves to do what they needed to do. A lot of them spoke about authenticity, to speak their truths. They really had to really talk themselves up to believing in themselves. One mom said she was known as tenacious even from when she was a child, and she would just never give up. She was just known to always fight. And then other participants, the moms, talked about just having this like positive mindset no matter what was thrown at them. And they looked at their spirituality and their faith for inspiration to keep that positivity flowing. For theme 3, this came out of their ambition for wanting more opportunity in their professional endeavors. These women, a lot of them were in the helping professions, but they wanted to do more. They had a desire to do more within their careers, and from doing that, they wanted to marry their academic knowledge with their professional knowledge. And this was really out of the basis of wanting to be and give, like be an agent of social change, to give back and help others on a broader scale. And then theme 4 was this social support that the mothers had received. They had supportive resources to help them through. For these single moms, instrumental support in in the areas of childcare, pet care, helping do chores around the house, ride sharing, access to self-care, and financial assistance. They used informational support. They used in the areas of advice, mentorship, academic tools and resources, and emotional support in the areas of friendship, encouragement, love, and camaraderie. Their social support networks were typically family, close friends. Believe it or not, social media networks, I didn't think that they would have time to post on social media, but a lot of them talked about posting their progress on social media, and people just going like, that's the way to go for it. And that really helped them just keep moving on. Also through work colleagues and peers and faculty in their programs was very significant to their success. So the next slide, please. These were the themes that I found for barriers to their academic success. The most difficult part of being a single mom they spoke about was just the demands that they had placed on them, just being a mom and also having to play the role of mother, father, caregiver, all of that. They said that all these demands increases their stress, and this made little time for self-care. And then as a result, their well-being would become compromised, and this would be a detriment to their physical and emotional health. A lot of moms talked about, you know, having to suffer. They went through a depression and anxiety. One mom said that her hair fell out, you know, I mean, they just had gone through so much. And another big struggle was financial. They had a lot of financial worries, and this also caused that maladaptive thinking of, self-doubt and just feeling like discouraged. And also too, like I had said, the physical health problems, just kind of having stomach problems and psychological health problems. So a lot of psychosomatic type of symptoms. The last theme here with barriers was this inability to manage their time. This was another big barrier for these moms. Life was a juggling act. They had to struggle to find that work-life balance, and their barriers with time management also impeded their emotional health and their motivation. Okay, the next slide, please. This slide talks about the coping methods that I found. So for this theme, the first theme, theme 7 actually, it was, this is their self-care habits that they spoke about to cope with their barriers. They did use a variety of self-care, and they were really super creative with their self-care. But some of the self-care that they preferred was this personal self-care methods. They talked about trying to catch a nap here and there. That was one. Keeping that positive mindset was a form of self-care, and scheduling that me time. They really tried to schedule some me time whenever they could, whether it was 15 minutes in the morning after their kid got on the bus or right after the kids went to bed and they just could sit and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or watch their shows. That was their time. Another thing that they did was physical self-care, which was in the form of taking walks, doing yoga. And the moms that talked about that, they kind of used that time also to bond with their children. So it was like family time, but it was also, it was a win-win because then they were able to do their self-care. And also spiritual self-care was another one. They talked a lot about meditation, finding some quiet time to quiet their mind when they were going through some emotional problems. And then that social self-care also, which was just kind of reaching out to family and friends for emotional support. And then emotional self-care for doing things like self-reflection and mindfulness. The other theme with overcoming the barriers was this way of being able to have certain organizational tactics that they used. They were very good with this. They knew that, I know they spoke about like the needing to have control of their time and also their finances. I mean, to these moms, time was money, and they really just needed to make sense of it all. And in order to do that, they had to stay organized and plan. They were big planners. And so they used a lot of calendar apps, the online calendars. One mom carried a paper calendar in her pocketbook and had an online calendar. They were big on creating checklists, just kind of checking off that day-to-day stuff that they had to do. And another thing they talked about, which they also knew was kind of a detriment at times, was multitasking. Because sometimes multitasking caused them to have more anxiety, but they had no choice. They had to fit stuff in. So sometimes they would do like their work on their lunch hour. And then another mom talked about how she would do her work while her daughter was in swim class. She'd be sitting on the side of the pool doing her coursework. So they really had to do some multitasking. Okay, next slide. So this slide is kind of the phenomenological piece, like the overall experience of this encapsulates everything that I learned from these moms. And basically, this talked about a day in the life of being a single mom and an online graduate student, and then regarding these specific factors. So they really, from everything, all these interviews together, it was mostly an overall overwhelming and tumultuous experience for these moms. They struggled a lot with role conflict. They couldn't be the best in everything that they wanted to be. Something had to give. So that was hard for them. And when asked about like a typical day, they had said that being a student really adds more to their to-do list, and it also means less time to spend with their family and on their own self-care. They said, sometimes they see people going off and having fun on their days off and they're studying. So that was one thing that they had spoke about. Their motivation was both intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsically, they talked about, being their role model and putting their education into practice to make change and engaging in that social support, because that provided them a feeling of self-accomplishment. And they really enjoyed those small achievements along the way. One mom had said, it's not about the end, about getting this degree, it's about enjoying the process. And so that was really nice. Extrinsically, of course, they wanted that professional and personal rewards, career growth, professional development, and because along with that came that financial stability and security that they needed for their families. As far as motivation, also their motivation, I inquired about how their motivation, does it increase or decrease? So, and overall, their motivation increased over time when they were in school. And what made their academic motivation strong was this opportunity of being able to do something with their lives, having that independence, and being self-fulfilled. They felt that this degree that they were working on, no matter how hard it was something that no one can take away from them. This is for them. And it is a chance to do what they want to do and be who they want to be. Now moving into the self-efficacy overall, their self-efficacy, this was pretty strong for the moms overall, and it was really rooted in their positive mindset, their strong character traits, and their experience of working through some tough personal and professional situations throughout their lives. However, although the motivation kind of was pretty consistent, and it got stronger as they were longer there in school, their self-efficacy wavered. It was really kind of based on their barriers. So their barriers really affected their efficacy the most. And this was based on if their academic progress would be a trouble. They would really worry about that. They really worried about falling behind, and even the slightest setback would disrupt their belief system. And so a lot of them struggled with perfection and anxiety because of that. And this would sometimes lead to those self-discouragement, those thoughts of being self-discouraged and having self-doubt, and also guilt about kind of what they're doing. Now, as far as social support overall, this turned out to be interesting, the key component to the relationship between motivation, efficacy, and their academic success. I mean, this social support was like, without this support, I could not do this. I would not be able to have the motivation or this drive. And these women, they knew who to call. I mean, they were so self-regulated. If they felt like quitting, they would look to their family and their peers for informational and emotional support. When they needed direction and or to understand expectations, they knew to contact faculty and for just that mentorship, or just getting some informational support from faculty. And when they just needed advice and just plain friendship, they looked to their peers for emotional and informational support. Now, as far as barriers overall, I talked about time, finances, physical health, and mental health. Their barriers was something that was also consistent. And these barriers did not go away even when school was not in session. They always had barriers. And the barriers, unfortunately, they said trickled into their personal lives, mostly at home. They said that when they had barriers, they felt less tolerant of their children and their loved ones. And this sometimes led to self-isolation. And then, of course, with that self-isolation comes that self-doubt. They would feel exhausted and just, wondering why they made this choice. So there was a lot of, sometimes it's, their emotional health would suffer. So that was with the barriers. What's interesting though about barriers too, though, there was a positive side. And this was because they said no matter how stressed they were, they felt that there was purpose behind the pressure from the barriers. And they called this positive pressure. And they felt that, because with barriers, if they didn't have the barriers from school, obviously there's going to be barriers somewhere else. But this type of positive pressure was that it was because of graduate school. So there was something good behind it. And they said if they were not in school and have these pressures, they would feel much more hopeless and more trapped in their situations. Now, as far as coping overall, to manage those barriers, they used a lot of self-reflection and introspection for stress management. They, like I said, they could self-regulate. They used emotional self-regulation for wellness and cognitive self-regulation for their learning. And they coped to overcome mostly by those social support, self-care initiatives, and organizational skills. And also too, for the most part, when they used a coping method, they said they felt a sense of accomplishment. I had one outlier. I had a mom that said that, she felt worse from having to tap into her coping mechanisms because it just made her realize how difficult of a situation she was in. But that was only 1 out of 10. So most of them felt a sense of accomplishment. Okay, can we go to the next slide? This is just, I thought I would just kind of give a little takeaway, conclusion of everything that I learned from the study. So, overall, what motivates these single mom is just this opportunity to be better as their roles as moms, better in roles as their providers, and as career professionals. For them, education was a chance to create change. And this was not only in the lives of their lives, but lives for others. They spoke about, just giving back to their community a lot. And balancing single motherhood with graduate studies obviously was full of ups and downs, but on the upside, felt there was a sense of accomplishment. And on the downside, though, there was that guilt and self-doubt. Although they were highly confident in their ability to be successful and in their academic lives, I found that, they consistently struggled in their personal lives to find that work-life balance and to manage their wellness. When faced with barriers, they relied on their social support, their self-care practices, their organizational skills, and that power within themselves to make their dreams come true. Next slide. I just thought I would give some information, just some social change implications, because we're Walden and we're all about social change. And this is a big social change study because we're talking about mothers and children later on. But anyway, this was really first, I think, on a personal level, this was an opportunity for moms to, and for this research, to inform and empower other single mothers who are daunted by higher ed, that think that they can't do it. Their stories, these moms' stories, serve as a platform for social change at that level, to let them know that they can do it. And then also as the personal level is likely going to lead to change at the community level, because this trickles down into their families and into their communities too. They spoke a lot about having a love of learning, and this was through being able to connect their passion in their graduate studies with their professional lives. So being able to put their education into practice at work promotes the social change also at that macro level to reach out to their communities. I think that the second implication for social change was on the organizational level. This was more for kind of like for schools and universities who have students like single moms, these non-traditional type students. Based on the barriers that I've learned about, I thought that maybe, they could use this research to learn about this population and to help put policies and practices in place specifically designed to guard against barriers for these type of students. Perhaps a streamlined program curriculum, flexible attendance policies, financial wellness and time management workshops, all of those things that kind of popped up in the interviews just to help counteract attrition. And also another option was, to perhaps instead of looking at these types of students as just like an ID number, to kind of see them as people and they have specific needs. And so, being more proactive than reactive and putting supportive practices in place and maintaining a close connection, perhaps following them throughout their journey. Maybe that student support staff can monitor their progress or lack thereof. And if they needed, to send them links to supportive resources so that help them resolve any kind of conflicts that they're having, whether it's academic, social, health, or financial issues. And this way, the moms who are so busy, they don't have to take time out of their busy day to search and seek out support in the organizational level. These resources come to them and they're readily available to help with their situations to meet their needs. Okay, next slide. So this is the recommendations for future research. This kind of came out of the research that I found. I was thinking some recommendations for some future studies. I think that it would be kind of nice to look into investigating community building in the online setting for non-traditional type students. A lot of the moms talked about feeling sad and lonely and isolated. And this was also in the undergraduate studies that I found, looking at undergraduate single moms. And feeling, sometimes moms felt ostracized. That was more face-to-face, the face-to-face things, but they just kind of felt the need that they needed to belong. So that would be something to be nice with. And in line with community building, another recommendation would be to have like peer modeling and developing grit. Maybe having graduate student single moms use peer modeling strategies with undergraduate single moms to grow grit for retention and achievement and for well-being. I found research on grit that said that grit was better. It was good with students. Students that had higher depression were less gritty. So the more grit you had fewer depressive symptoms. I found that. And I also found that grit was associated with educational attainment and grows with age and gender differences as well. More women were grittier than men in these doctoral studies that I found with grit. So I think that would be really nice if they have this peer modeling, just to kind of have this opportunity to develop relationships with one another. And that would would be more on an academic standpoint, but also on a personal standpoint, mother to mother, just to improve those coping strategies, keeping them resilient and help their well-being. Another recommendation that I was thinking about was looking into single moms who have earned their degrees and are working in faculty positions, and to gain their perspectives on the problem. I found there's something called the leak in the academic pipeline, which is this gender imbalance in academia. Given that I found that motherhood is significantly related to attrition in graduate students. It would be useful for researchers to maybe do kind of like a longitudinal study and kind of follow these moms and who have earned their doctorates, and to learn about their experiences parenting and the long-term effects of their degrees on career mobility, and also to just gain their perception on why they feel women are leaking out of academia. And the next slide. And we're at Q&A. Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
As folks consider any questions, oh, well, we already have one. So Latoya asks, did you see any generational similarities and or differences between your study participants?
I did see some, well, with generational, do you mean like first generation college students? Because yes, definitely. In fact, I'm going to say all of them, if I can remember, were first generation college students.
Okay, thank you for that. She hasn't yet responded with.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Maybe clarifying, but
yeah, that's.
She said, or later in life mothers.
Yes. Mothers, I would say they were in the average range of like between 40s and 50s. So, I mean, some had like their kids were kind of like in high school, you know what I mean? But a lot of them, you know, they were older moms.
Thanks.
Yep.
Was there anything in your study, and this is just a question I'm kind of throwing out there, that surprised you and you didn't expect?
Yes. I was surprised at the self-care habits that these women had, because when I looked at research of the other undergraduate single moms, really, because there wasn't a lot out there with the graduate student single moms, they did not have any self-care. But the doctoral moms and the master's level moms in my study, they knew about self-care. And I'm wondering if that has something to do with the longer you're in education, you know, the higher your education level, you learn about these things, or if it's just a Walden thing. But yeah, I was surprised of their level of knowledge about self-care and how they knew how important it is. However, I'm going to add to that. A lot of the women had come out while I was interviewing them, they were in the helping professions. You know, they were social workers, they were counselors, they were in mental health counseling or psychologists. So I think that had something to do too with the self-care. But I was surprised that they actually had the self-care that they did and they knew about it.
Yeah, that is interesting. Prior to having self-care, you have to have awareness that you need self-care.
Exactly. And they were so self-aware of their need for self-care. It's just that they struggled to find the time for it. And that was that conflict, you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
So Karen says and asks, as someone who works in a center, if there was one new initiative you could implement as a result of your findings, what might that be? And then she kind of has a part 2 here, and I'm happy to repeat it if you need me to.
Yeah.
But she said, meaning, how can Walden support single moms based on your findings? Dr. Palermo Kell.
I think, thanks, Karen. I think that we just need to look closely at this type of population and just realize that they're out there and just kind of what they need, you know, just kind of having more available for them and their individual needs. Like I was talking about maybe having some workshops and looking into, you know, just what they're doing with their degrees and where they are and their progress and how can we help them. That's what I would think about. I remember in the research reading about how, you know, there's more women in higher ed than men. However, women are not completing as quickly as men, and single moms even have a harder time at that. I think they're like much like a third less or something. It takes them so much longer, and women are more apt to take money through loans. So the longer they're in school and the more money they're borrowing, things like that, I think it just causes much more stress. I just would, maybe it's something that we could do to help streamline the process for them and support them.
Thank you.
Yep.
So Jean-Marc asks, how might the findings of your study be disseminated to potentially reach a greater number of single mothers?
That's a very good question. I think what I would probably do is try to look at maybe other populations outside of so maybe a comparative study, like looking at online and then also face-to-face single moms and see if they have the same struggles. And that might be able to, get it out there to a more diverse community.
If you have any ideas of how she might, you can probably share.
Oh yeah, please.
She
Please do.
You can see that.
Yeah. Oh, there was something that came to mind and it just slipped my mind about that too. Oh, shoot. Or maybe it'll come to me. I know, right. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, you just mentioned working with public radio potentially, and Melanie had a comment on.
Oh.
You mentioned a moment ago, she just added that women are likely to put themselves ahead of, or put others ahead of themselves.
Yes.
Their needs are second to all their other responsibilities.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a big piece of it. That's a really big piece of it. And that's something that's like natural to us too. It's kind of hard to not do that. You know what? Oh, I was going to say, it's what's difficult about this is that, there's this stigma sometimes with single moms. So believe it or not, even in today's society, they don't like to talk about. I mean, they're more open now about it. Before it's almost like, like the race thing, they don't really want to be out there saying, I'm a single mom and I'm struggling. They just want to be treated like everybody else. But so it's hard to to get those people out there to talk about it.
Sure. I had a quick thought too in regards to disseminating.
Mm-hmm.
I know, being a tried and true millennial, that YouTubers, especially the ones who have a really large base and they fact check their information before they just share it out, there could be some YouTube channels that actually
yeah,
or YouTubers that speak to single moms or talk about parenting that might, find your research of use and can share it with their followers.
That's a great idea. I'd even think about YouTube, to be honest. Yes, I think that's something I'd have to look into for sure. I think it's so important to get their voices heard, really important. There's, like I said, I was talking about the stigma, and this kind of goes back to way, when you're with the welfare reform and all this kind of stuff, where people kind of pictured single moms as lazy, kind of just, taking and not giving. But this is not the case. Not from what I learned. It is not the case. And I'm a single mom too. So now, I wasn't then when I first started the research, believe it or not, I am now. And I see, boy, it's difficult. It's really hard.
All right, looks like we have one more question.
Yep.
From Melanie. She said, Dr. Palermo Kales, I have to say that.
I know.
You're not tired of it yet.
No, not yet, no.
So your research is so relevant to Walden, with our student population skewing heavily more toward women than men.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned in your recommendation section that you had studied moms in undergraduate programs at one point.
Yes.
If so, could you speak to the differences you found between these undergrad and doctoral populations?
Yes, I think it was really about coping. The one thing that I could say was, now also too, it was the level too, with the research on undergrad it pretty much stopped at the associate's level. And I think because back when I was researching this was, oh goodness, like a year or so ago, when I was writing the proposal and everything, community college was kind of out there, they were giving to go to school, you'd pay less. And also too, with this population, because they struggle financially, obviously community college is where they're going to look for the research. But I really felt that the difference was that with their coping was when the moms and the undergraduate students, when they relied more on the educational environment, like support teams within the educational environment, like registration, getting themselves acclimated to the school, faculty, whereas the moms, the doctoral level and the graduate level that I found, they relied more on social support and like the people in their peers within the classes with them, faculty as well, but I would say so. I would say it's kind of similar with the undergraduate because it was staff, but it was more faculty, whereas the undergraduates looked at more like student support type of people, like the registrars and getting themselves acclimated and, filling out the paperwork to get into school, financial aid people, like more of the administrative staff, I guess you could say, where the doctoral students looked more at like the teaching staff and the faculty. And I think a lot of that was because there's some mentorship there as well. It's a more professional type of environment when you're a master's or doctoral level. So I think that's why. And they weren't new to school either because they went through undergraduate. So I would say coping and support.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Sarah added a comment that you might appreciate. She said, remember Murphy Brown addressed the stress of being a single mom. When you're home, you worry about work. And when you're at work, you worry about the kids.
Oh, that is so true. And you know what? That came through in the interviews too. Believe it or not, I do remember they were saying, and that's why I was saying the barriers never go away, right? Because they were always having to think ahead. So when they were in one place, they were always thinking about what's going to happen in the other place. So if they're at work, they're thinking about what's going on at home. When they're at home, they're thinking about how they got to take care of their kids to get ready for school. And then they got to think about their own schoolwork. Another thing is they hardly slept. I mean, I asked them as part of the interviews, just curious, what time do you wake up and what time do you go to sleep? And I am telling you, their kids would go to bed somewhat early, but they were up till like midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and then they'd have to get up at 6:30 the next day to get their kids ready and get them off to school. It was tough. So I love that Murphy Brown comment. It's so true.
Yep. Kudos to all single parents.
I'm telling you.
All right. Looks like folks enjoyed your presentation.
Oh, good.
Excellent points, and kudos to you for your research.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was so nervous. I'm glad that everybody enjoyed it. It's so important to get these women's voices out there. And, I'm thinking maybe next single dads. We'll see.
Why not?
It'd be interesting, right? I know, right?
We all need a light
That's
shine on us in some form.
Absolutely. Yes. I don't want to discount any single fathers. That's for sure.
All right. Well, if there isn't any more questions, we will conclude Dr. Palermo Caleb's presentation for today. And thank you all for joining CRQ and our research conference.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashley.
All right. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone.